I want to tell you about the saddest player to ever play Blaseball, but before I do that, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what Blaseball is. If you're not familiar, make sure you stick around through this intro. If you are, you can skip to right around here in the time code, but it might be worth sticking around anyway. Make sure we all agree on terminology. Blaseball is an online baseball simulator, though really I should say it was and will be an online baseball simulator since at the time of this recording it is not active. It features fictional teams with names like the Dallas Stakes, the Philly Pies, the Mexico City Wild Wings, and the Miami Dale, to give a few examples. And each of those teams has fictional players. Each of those players is going to have stats given in terms of stars, rounded to the nearest half star, which roughly indicates how good they are at fake baseball. If I wanted to get really into the nitty-gritty, I could start talking about these substats that are within the other stats, but I don't have the time for that. We have a deadline for where we have to catch everyone up, so I'm just going to focus on star ratings. They're pretty good at judging how good a player is, especially in this era. They're not perfect, but generally speaking, they'll give you a good idea where someone is. I'm going to assume you have a basic idea of how baseball works because honestly, you only need to know that some players usually pitch, some players usually bat. We don't have a Shohei Ohtani situation here. The players are generally going to stick to one of those two roles and not cross over unless something weird happens. There are some important ways where Blaseball differs from baseball, starting off with the fans most of all. A fan is a human like yourself or perhaps me who is going to go on to blaseball.com to participate in the game. A player is what we're going to call the fictional players who do the Blaseball. Fans could bet on the outcome of games to earn coins. These coins could be used to buy items that would allow them to place more coins on these games and continue to gain more and more coins as time goes on. The other way a fan can earn coins is through idling a player. IDOL, that is. It's funny, it's a joke, it's an idle game. Do you get it now? The way that you would do that is you would buy certain items that would make your idol give you more coins when they do certain things. If they're a batter, it would be when they get a hit or perhaps a home run. If they were a pitcher, it would be if they get strikeouts, or if they shut out the side, allow 0 runs, then you would get more coins because you picked them properly. Idling had a number of strategies. You could pick one player and say, this is my favorite player. I will always idle this player no matter what. I am not going to shift. You could say, hey, that player over there, they hit a bunch of home runs last season. I'm going to idle them and forget it until things roll around to the next season. You could go through and look at each of the pitching matchups each day and say, this pitcher has a pretty good chance of getting a shutout. I am going to switch to them once all the day's games conclude and micromanage like that. I say from experience, but in any case, you could only ever idle one player per account. That was it. You had no option to idle a second player if you got enough coins. One player per fan. Right? There were also some other ramifications to idling, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So you're a fan and you get all of these coins that you turn into votes. What do you use the votes for? Well, you have two main things throughout the Discipline era. You could spend those votes on decrees, which are majority rule options that impact the entire league that I'm really not going to spend a lot of time talking about because I don't personally find them very interesting and they are not the subject we're discussing today. Or you could vote for blessings, which would enter your vote into a raffle that would be pulled from at the end of the season, and if your ticket gets pulled out, then your team that you have chosen is going to get that blessing, and whatever it reads will be applied to your team. The solar eclipse is a type of weather in the game that will occasionally cause a rogue umpire to incinerate a player. A player is then immediately replaced by a randomly generated other player, and play continues. That player is removed from the game, and it is very difficult, not quite impossible, for them to ever return to play. At the end of Season 1, the fans decided they should open the Forbidden Book, and as a result, Jalen Hotdog Fingers was the first player incinerated immediately after that. Seasons 2 through 3, there were a bunch of incinerations. Seasons 4 through 6, things cooled down a bit. There were other weathers added into the mix. And then, in the Season 6 elections, the fans manipulated the idling system to allow them to bring Jalen Hotdog Fingers back. Jalen began to bean other players, hit them with pitches, and that caused them to become unstable or more susceptible to solar eclipses and incineration. More incinerations followed, and things were pretty rough through there on. Eventually, the Jalen situation settled down, but throughout all of that time, Jalen was the only player who had been incinerated outside of a solar eclipse. Once we get to Season 8, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Incinerations are a controversial part of Blaseball. There are some fans who would rather have their players stay safe and protected forever, and don't want anything bad to ever happen to them, only good things, especially not having them removed from the game pretty much permanently. Some fans recognize that there is a necessary mechanical churn that must happen, and you need new players so that people can draw new art of them, people can make new stories about them, and they don't like incinerations, but they recognize something has to be there to make it happen, and incineration is a way to make that happen. And there are fans who enjoy incinerations. They like to see other people's favorite players be incinerated. They think it's funny. I'm not here to say that any of these takes is particularly wrong or right. I certainly don't subscribe to one of those, and you'll see as I discuss this which one I'm definitely not in of those three camps. But if that's your take, that's your take. You're probably not going to enjoy this video. Speaking of, here's the video. If I were to make a video about my headcanon version of August Mina, I could literally make it 10 times longer than this one. I have written 90% of the content about her out there. If I use a conservative estimate, I've drawn her dozens of times. I have made a Twine game starring her. I have run her Twitter RP account for the last almost 2 years. If you're looking for an authority on the commonly accepted fan version of August Mina, I am the authority. With that said, this video is not about that. This video is about what canonically happened to August Mina on Blaseball.com, and we are going to dig through that together. I will do my best to be objective. I will probably fail at times, but I am checking myself every step of the way to see if I am being unfair. I'm sure I'll hear all about the ways that I am in the comments, but that's what the comments section is for. In Season 1, August Mina played for the Philly Pies. We know very little about the season. There is pretty much no official record left that the archivists can dig up, but we do know two things. August Mina was a horrible batter, and we know that the Philly Pies won the championship. In the Season 1 election, the Dallas Stakes won a blessing that maxed out one of their batter stars. That batter was Jessica Telephone. Also in that same election, the Philly Pies won a blessing that allowed them to steal the best batter in the league and send back their worst batter. That best batter was Jessica Telephone, and their worst batter was August Mina. After the Season 1 elections, August Mina was a Dallas Stake. We're going to be talking a lot in this video about fairness and unfairness, and there is a very good chance you are not going to agree with me on everything where I say something is fair or unfair. That's fine. This is a very subjective thing. I am merely presenting my take on it from a game design standpoint, viewing it through the lens of a fan of a team that has a very small fan base. Was it fair that the Dallas Stakes won a blessing and then another team had a blessing that took it away from them even though they won the championship, and so maybe they should have been ranked higher in the standings and had their blessing pop first. Yes. Yeah, I think that's fair. That's the way the designers set up the game. They just let it run. I am upset about it, but ultimately, I think it's fair that that happened. I wouldn't want them to go in and change it just because I was sore that something unexpected happened if that's the way that they had it planned. Especially since the exact same thing happened to the Kansas City Breathmints. They maxed out their pitcher, Polka Dot Patterson, who was then stolen away by the Baltimore Crabs in exchange for a pitcher by the name of Winnie Hess, who had 0 stars. So August has 1 star, Winnie doesn't have any, so that's all fair, right? They also got hosed, right? Winnie Hess mysteriously improved to 2.5 stars after being traded from the Baltimore Crabs to the Kansas City Breathmints. An investigation may be incoming. The most accepted explanation for this mysterious blessing is that the election was run multiple times on accident, and Winnie Hess accidentally caught one of those blessings. But if that's the case, why weren't her stats maxed out? There wasn't a blessing that would get her to be pretty good. There was one that would max her out. There was one that would make her whole team slightly better at pitching. There was no boost from 0 to 2.5 stars. I will also point out that at the same time, not noted in the mystery blessings, the Dallas Stakes hitters who were active at the start of this blessing circuit all received a 10% boost to their hitting stats. They didn't get a little message saying that an investigation may be incoming about that. It just sort of happened. And yes, I did say at the start of the blessing cycle, so that means that August Mina, who was not on the stakes at the start of the blessing cycle, did not catch that 10% boost. So you could very easily be asking me, Josh, why are you upset about this? Didn't the stakes also get a boost after they got their blessing quote-unquote stolen? Aren't the stakes and the Breathmints both now on equal footing of being given some recompense after they had the bad thing happen to them? If your only concern in Blaseball is making your team's numbers go up on the website, yes, I can see an argument where this is fair. I would say that having one pitcher go from absolutely awful to pretty decent is a bigger boost than having all of your batters get a little bit better, especially considering what happened to those batters over the next 2 seasons, but we'll cross that bridge in a moment. I would rather have the better pitcher, but I can see an argument on both sides of that argument that I would reluctantly agree with. With that said, I think that this outcome leaves the stakes screwed and August Mina screwed. From the stakes perspective, it now looks like Blaseball is willing to make concessions to make the Kansas City Breathmints feel better about their loss and are not willing to do that for the Dallas Stakes. Now, I am a Pirates fan of real baseball. I know how it feels to root for a team that perpetually loses. That's not what I'm talking about here. The Pirates do not have the commissioner of baseball come out and say, we have given the Cincinnati Reds a better pitcher. We're not going to talk about why, but an investigation may be incoming. The Pirates don't get that. I don't know if Winnie Hess receiving that blessing was originally done deliberately. I don't think it was. But it's framed in such a way by Blaseball to make it look like they could have changed that for the stakes, and they just didn't. So if I'm a new fan coming into Blaseball, and people are telling me about what happened in Season 1, and I see, oh hey, the stakes got hosed, and there's nothing good coming their way, the Breathmints got hosed, something good came their way, all other things being equal, am I going to pick the team that gets sucker punched or the team that doesn't get sucker punched? I think I know my answer. From August Mina's perspective, though, This is obviously unfair. Now, if you're the kind of person who thinks that Blaseball players are just lines of code stored in some document somewhere, this argument is not going to appeal to you. But I'm going to hope that you're not entirely that. Jessica Telephone, Polka Dot Patterson, and Winnie Hess have all made it into the technically unofficial but constantly retweeted by the Blaseball account on Twitter Hall of Fame voting. Easily sailed in first ballot, no question. August hasn't appeared on the ballot, but I'm going to guess that she's not going to make the 5% that gets her through past her first ballot. If she does, it will mostly be my fault. There is no mechanical reason to vote for the career of August Mina. She started out as a bad hitter, and she remained a bad hitter, and Blaseball could have changed that, and it just didn't, even though it did for Winnie Hess. I don't think that's fair. You might disagree with me, but I do not see a good argument for saying what happened to Winnie Hess and didn't happen to August Mina. That's totally fair. No one has a reason to complain about it. In isolation, this wouldn't be so bad, but this video still has quite a bit of time left in it, and you're going to see Blaseball was continuously not kind to August Mina, and this just set the first nail in the coffin. There are many more to come. So hey, why wait? And in case you were wondering, no, there wasn't ever an official investigation. At least not that we saw. Canonically, it's just, whoops, Kansas City Breath Mints get something nice. What can we do? Seasons 2 through 5 for the Dallas Stakes involve magnificent regular seasons, especially Season 2, where they go 72-27, only to lose in the first round of the playoffs, usually 3-1. That 72-27 season, though, they took it to 3-2. Way to go, Season 2 Stakes. Also, during those seasons, 4 of the Dallas Stakes hitters are incinerated. Hey, you remember that 10% hitting boost that all the Dallas Stakes hitters except for August Mina received? Half of it's gone now. There are also 2 incontrovertible truths about the Dallas Stakes roster that we must address at this point. Connor Haley was a very bad pitcher for the Dallas Stakes. He had very good batting stars. August Mina was a very bad hitter for the Dallas Stakes. She also had very bad pitching stars, but slightly better than Connor Haley's. In the Season 5 election, there was a blessing called mutual aid, where your worst batter and your worst pitcher on your team would swap places. Well, August joining the pitching rotation wouldn't be a great boon, but getting Connor out of there and having him in the lineup, that should certainly help, right? It's going to be very helpful if the Stakes can manage to pull it, though the Stakes can't pull much. We haven't gotten any blessings since that Season 1 blessing. Our fan base is small, and we're just going at this on a wing and a prayer, hoping somehow we can pull this off. And surprisingly enough, we not only get mutual aid with 2,000 out of the about 35,000 votes cast, we happen to pull that 7% chance. We also get a 1% chance, which means that the best hitting pitcher is going to join our hitting lineup. That would be one August Sky coming from the Jazz Hands. And now our lineup is pretty stacked. Our pitching rotation is still not great, but we've gotten better. And after making the playoffs the last 5 seasons, you know what's going to happen next, right? Ding, ding, ding. The Dallas Stakes missed the playoffs in Seasons 6 and 7 despite these improvements. One could be tempted to say, Connor Haley, that's an improvement. August Sky, that's an improvement. The obvious problem is that August Mina is a pitcher and is a worse pitcher than Connor Haley. I disagree with that assessment. August Mina is not an awful pitcher. I am not saying that she's good. I will not even say that she is an okay pitcher, but she's not awful. If you saw an MLB roster with a pitcher with a 6.07 ERA and a 1.5 whip, which is August Mina's career statistical total. You would say, oh, that's a bad pitcher. I'm surprised that they're in the major leagues. You would not say, that's the worst pitcher I've ever seen. If Blaseball were like baseball, August Mina could have gone down to the minors, worked on her mechanics, and come back up. At this point in the discipline era, that option is not on the table. So August Mina is going to do the best she can and is going to put up the best numbers she can, which are not very good, but they're not awful. The one highlight of August Mina's career as a pitcher came, appropriately enough, against the Philly Pies, starring Jessica Telephone, when August Mina pitched her one and only shutout. Other than that, August Mina would range from okay to absolutely awful for no apparent reason. What were her weaknesses? Well, she would give up more walks than she probably should. She couldn't pick off a base runner to save her life, so they would steal off of her all day long. But really, she wasn't weak at any one thing other than that. She just also wasn't good at any one thing other than that. In stark contrast, Connor Haley was an absolute monster at the plate right from the get-go. If you are a baseball manager and you want a decent batter, you're looking for around a 0.750 OPS, or on-base plus slugging. On-base means that the batter is good at not getting out at the plate. Slugging means that they're good at hitting for power, hitting doubles, triples, maybe home runs even if they are feeling especially beefy that day. 0.75, pretty good OPS, the higher the better. Connor Haley started out with a 0.982 OPS and only went up from there. In the season 6 elections, the Stakes won another blessing, rate and review, thanks to yet another long shot, and that caused their most idled player to gain a big boost to their stats. That player was Connor Haley, and he started to go on even more of a tear, dominating most of the stats in the league. Hit the very first 40 homer, 40 stolen bases season in Blaseball. Absolute legend at the plate. After a lengthy campaign, Connor Haley did make it into the unofficial but pretty official Hall of Fame. And I'm glad he did. He absolutely deserves it. It's a good thing that the voters mostly overlooked his pitching career. His 36% win rate as a pitcher exactly matches that of August Mina. Though I will say, there is one batting accomplishment that Connor Haley does not have under his belt that August Mina does. It's season 5, and we're in the playoffs. The Stakes are facing the San Francisco Lovers in what would turn out to be a 4-game series. August Mina posted an OPS of 1.471. This is a small sample size, but Connor Haley, in all of his postseason experience, has never come close to touching this number. August Mina put on an absolute show in that postseason. But in the end, it wasn't enough. One player's individual impressive accomplishment is not enough to change the tide for an entire team. And in case you were wondering, in that playoff series, Connor gave up 7 runs in one of the 3 losses, just in case you were curious. Am I saying that August Mina deserves to be in the Hall of Fame instead of Connor Haley? No. No, I know better than that. But she does deserve her moment in the spotlight. She deserves a moment that she can celebrate, because she never got one. It's season 6, and Blaseball has a problem. That's understating it. Blaseball has many problems, but we're going to focus on the ones that we're going to talk about here. The good teams were popular, and they were getting more popular. That makes sense. It feels good when you win. And so if you're a player joining this online baseball simulator, after looking around for a bit, you might say, hey, that team wins a lot of blessings. I would like for it to feel like I'm helping to get those blessings. I will join that team. I will not join those teams that do not win many blessings. So it's season 6, and there are 3 decrees available on the election. There's hot sauce, which would make one player from each team spicy, an ambiguous term. There's new kids, which would incinerate the least idled player on each team. Yikes. And there is enhanced party time. Party time is the Blaseball term for when your team is eliminated from the postseason, mathematically speaking. They do not have enough games left to get enough wins where they can make it into the playoffs. Enhanced party time would mean that the teams that are still playing those games would have a chance to receive random permanent stat boosts during their games. Enhanced party time won in a landslide. And it should. It's a very well thought out decree. That said, it's not without its flaws. I think that saying that something is good and then saying it cannot receive any criticism is a pretty silly thing to say. So I'm going to criticize it. We humans are bad at recognizing randomness. Specifically, it's very easy for us to see 2 random patterns and say that one of them is unfair. If there was a team that got eliminated with 15 games left to play and they only received 5 party time boosts, and another team had 5 games left to play and in those 5 games they received 15 party time boosts, we might say that's unfair. It's not, but it feels like it, doesn't it? Maybe you are a mathematical paragon of virtue and you can recognize that yes, we haven't gotten any boosts for the last 5 games, but that's just randomness at play, and you don't need to worry about it, and this is actually fair. But if you're in the chat with other fans of the team that hasn't won a party time boost in the last 5 games, the vibes, they're bad. You don't want to have to experience that. So the decree says they have to be random. They could still be random, but they could be more consistent. You could have it where at the end of each party time game, everyone on the team gets a very small 0.5% boost, maybe 0.6, maybe 0.4, maybe 0.001, but something that bumps them up and makes them a better player during party time. Guaranteed, but still with some randomness to it. And you could still have in what is currently the enhanced party time effect, the rare party happenstance in the middle of a game. Just make it 2 or 3 times rarer, and then it's a special treat for a special little Blaseball player. What fun! You got the normal boost, and you get a party on top of it. Bonus party! Who doesn't love a bonus party? Since I'm discussing this in a video about August Mina, you can probably guess how many times August Mina experienced an enhanced party time boost. 0. None. In fact, the stakes pitchers were widely resistant to party time. It was quite a painful thing to watch because that's where they really needed the help, and they didn't really get it. They got 3 party time boosts while the batters got 15 of them. And in case you're thinking, well, maybe pitchers are just less likely to get them than batters, guess who experienced a total of 5 party time boosts between seasons 8 and 9? It's our good friend, Winnie Hess, taking her from a 2.5 star pitcher all the way up to a 4.5 star pitcher. I am not saying that this was an unfair setup. I think that it's perfectly fair that Winnie Hess got 5 boosts and August got none. It feels bad though. And I think it should be pointed out when game design systems feel bad, especially when they're implemented in such a way that doesn't help out the teams that have already been kicked in the teeth several times by the other mechanics. those things stack on top of each other. You can't just view them in isolation. It also stacks up for players who have not received the kind end of the mechanical stick. August Mina never received any stat changes throughout her entire Blaseball career. She came in as a 1-star batter and a 1-star pitcher, and she left as a 1-star batter and a 1-star pitcher. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In Season 8, there was a blessing called New Kid offered on the menu. It was like the Decree New Kids, but it had a smaller scope. It would only impact the team that won it, as happens to blessings. And it would incinerate their lowest idled player. It was not a very popular blessing. There was a similar blessing by the name of Composite that would send your worst pitcher into the shadows. That one got about 10 times more votes than New Kid did, but teams voted for New Kid. Specifically, the Garages won it, and Ron Monstera, their 2.5-star pitcher, was incinerated and replaced by Durham's Spaceman. Ron Monstera had an ERA of 4.24 and a WHIP of 1.124. In both of these cases, lower is better. Durham's Spaceman had an ERA of 4.16 and a WHIP of 1.065. What a great improvement, I say with considerable sarcasm. And so the Season 8 election concludes, and we enter Season 9. Only 2 hitters who received their 10% hitting boost remain on the stakes roster. Indeed, incineration remained a sensitive subject in Blaseball, and that obviously was heard by the devs, as on the menu board for Season 9, we have 3 blessings that can cause incinerations. 3. We had New Kid making a second appearance, Dead Weight, which would incinerate the statistically worst player on your team based on star rating, and Kill Your Darling, which would incinerate the most idled player on your team. Deadweight and New Kid had little subtitles to go along with them. Kill Your Darling did not. I don't think the devs could come up with something pithy and fun to say about maybe having one of a team's most beloved players incinerated. In the Season 7 election, the Miami Dale won a blessing that made one of their hitters absolutely awful at Blaseball, but allowed them to protect the rest of the team from incinerations. There was a movement growing in Blaseball that the Miami Dale should receive these incineration blessings, and this awful player could defend the rest of the team against them, gaining a stat boost for the Dale in the process. This movement was called Triple Kill, and it had some good support behind it. People saw it and said, yeah, that seems like a great idea. We don't want any of our players to be incinerated. Miami Dale, we think y'all should win this blessing. But not a lot of people gave it actual support. There was a mechanic in place called fluting, using an item called the Champagne Flute, which would allow a team to go from their team to another team for a substantial but not that substantial fee. And it would give them the option to vote for a blessing with that team, and then if they want, return to their original team after that. The Dale were not a very big team, and people assumed that they were the only ones going for those blessings, so there wasn't a whole lot of mechanical support for the Dale in this movement, or at least there wasn't enough. If the stakes had received dead weight, it would have landed on Gallup Crueler, a player with a lot of fan love in the stakes community, but not a lot of Blaseball skill. Instead, it landed with the Firefighters, who lost Thomas Kirby, a former stake who had eaten one too many peanuts despite his allergies. I don't know, and I don't think that anyone knows who New Kid would have hit on the stakes, but I remember that we were trying to make sure that all the players we liked had at least a few people idling them to make sure that they weren't left at zero. In the end, it went to the Dale, who did manage to have their player block the incineration plan work out, so it had some merit to it. And as for the Kill Your Darling blessing, well, who could it hit on the stakes except for Connor Haley? Connor Haley, the hitting icon, one of the best in the league, who had put up another magnificent performance. Not the best in the league, but certainly in the top 5 and certainly worthy of many people idling him. Who else could it have hit? You've watched this video. You know why we're here. There's only one answer. On October 11th, 2020, August Mina received the Kill Your Darling blessing. The stakes reportedly cast 8% of the 156,641 votes. That means that the stakes cast approximately 12,500 votes. That is far too many for one account to have earned during that season, barring some astronomical betting luck. There was no discussion of this happening on the stakes part of the Blaseball Discord. I have not found any of it on Twitter or Reddit. I have to assume this was the action of a single individual. There are only 2 reasons why I can think someone would do this, and they both would have to use the same method. During this time, it was not uncommon for a fan to set up multiple accounts, referred to in the common parlance as an alt, or alts, plural, because usually if you had one alt, you had several. There could have been a stakes fan who said, August Mina is a bad pitcher, and I want the stakes to have good pitchers, so I'm going to set up all of these alternate accounts to generate coins to win votes and to idle August Mina so that when the election rolls around, she is the one who will be hit by Kill Your Darling, and I'm going to hope that the ticket gets pulled. That may sound absurd, but it's the only one that I have found that makes the most sense based on the information of how it shook out. The other option, which I don't think is true, but I feel compelled to mention, is that someone didn't like how I was running August Mina. On Twitter, I know I had a few incidents that may have made this happen. I don't think this is it, but there is a sliver of a chance, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there because it is the only other thing that makes sense. Other than those 2 choices, there is nothing that logically clicks into place. If you were trying to mess with the stakes, statistically, you would have gotten rid of Connor Haley. There is no other explanation except for those 2. And if it was the first one, then the pitcher who replaced August Mina by the name of Kit Adams who is a wonderful character outside of Blaseball.com, was an absolutely awful player in Blaseball.com. Having August around would have been a much better solution from that standpoint. From the other standpoint, I decided, you know what? August Mina is not going to stay dead. In Fanon, she's alive. So there. In either case, whoever did this, your plan messed up. Deal with it. But that all means that August Mina is the only player in Blaseball history targeted by an assassination. You could say that Ron Moncera also could take that title, but without digging into Seattle Garage's culture, I would say that the other pitcher who might have been hit by this, by the name of Henry Marshallow, wasn't going to be hit by it because the name Henry Marshallow is going to get some idols. And so it makes sense that Ron Moncera was the least idled Seattle Garage. There's no logical reason why August Mina would be the most idled stake. But if you can find a way to convince me that it makes sense that August Mina was the most idled player, after Connor Haley hit 40 home runs for the stakes, I will personally pay you money, because there's no way that makes sense in the normal run of play. This had to be deliberate and targeted against August Mina. So if we zoom out, one person could set up multiple alternate accounts to make a decision that would impact an entire team, and Blaseball let it happen. How is this good game design? On Blaseball's homepage, it bills itself as a place of joy of sustained enthusiasm, quoting from a Polygon article. But if you stick around Blaseball long enough, at least as part of a team that gets kicked around a lot, that only holds true as long as you stay in your little pocket. Blaseball is a place that is run as an oligarchy. Whether that oligarchy is the larger teams having more fans to vote on blessings for them, or it's someone saying, hey, I'm going to make so many fan alt accounts and I'm going to rack up these idols and votes, you have a small collection of powerful people deciding how the game will run for everyone else. And if you started getting spicy in the Blaseball Discord, you would be told that this is the game working as intended and that you shouldn't be complaining about these things happening. So it's intended that your team is going to get hosed by things completely out of your control and that you didn't want, because one person decided, I want this to happen to that team. So in the light of all of this, as the discipline era was wrapping up, Blaseball had three big roads they could walk down. They could say, you know what? It is bad that we allowed for one person to manipulate the whole blessing system, and that we have allowed larger teams to have an outsized impact on smaller teams, effectively pushing them around wherever they want. We are going to make triple sure that while the bigger teams are going to get some benefit that they get because, they put in the work to make their teams bigger and more attractive, we're not going to punish teams for being small. And we're going to put in a lot of systems that make sure that those smaller teams are not pushed around by the bigger teams. That was a choice. They could have gone down that road. Option 2, they could have come out and they could have said, hey, yeah, smaller teams, you're right. There is some profoundly messed up stuff happening and you are getting pushed around. Guess what? That's going to happen again. That is Blaseball as it is meant to be played. It's probably going to suck for you, but you know what? This is the story we want to tell. We want to tell a story where people with more power can push around people with less power. If you're okay with that, stick around. If you're not, move to another team or leave the game. This is the story we're telling, and the only way that you're going to win is if in a freak accident, you manage to pull the best pitcher in the league and send back your worst pitcher. And even then, after that, your best hitters are going to have your OPS yo-yo from 1.152 to 0.692 between seasons for no apparent reason. And hey, listen, you're probably going to hate it, but you can't say we didn't warn you. We're telling you right now, the expansion era is going to suck for smaller teams. We're not going to apologize for it, but we are going to give you that heads up and have fun out there. Or they could just do all that stuff and not tell us that they're going to do it. I'll give you one guess which one they did. The climax of the discipline era came at the end of Season 10 when there was a battle between the Hall Stars, which were the 14 incinerated players who had been given the most peanuts. Essentially, you could turn a coin into a peanut and offer it as tribute. Let's not get too deeply into it, but it's basically the same thing as voting, but with a different version of the currency. They were playing against the Shelled Ones Pods, which were the players who had been previously shelled. Again, we don't have time to get into all the peanut business, just accept these were two teams that were chosen somewhat arbitrarily. In the end of Season 10, the 14 players in the Incineration Hall of Flame were given blue numbers, There was no way that August Mina was realistically going to mount a campaign to get into that top 14. Beloved stake Sebastian Telephone barely made it in, even though he definitely should have, but again, stakes players don't always get things that they should. And of course, he also got incinerated in the middle of that game and is back in the hall. Yay, stakes! And so Blaseball left the Discipline era and entered the Expansion era after a 5-month break, which at the time felt like a long time for a break. In that Expansion era, they introduced some new systems, including stadium renovations and wills. They're similar but different. Stadium renovations are chosen strictly by popular vote for each team, and if you have more coins put into the stadium renovations, you get more stadium renovations. So if the stakes had put in 1 million coins, they would get 2 stadium renovations instead of 1. They put in 4 million coins, they put in 3 renovations instead of 2. I don't think those numbers are exactly accurate, but that's the general idea. There's some multiplicative growth as you have more and more renovations. So you can't get too many, but you can get more than 1 if you put in enough coins. One team receiving a particular renovation would not have any impact on other teams. It's not like I take this renovation and you don't, or there is a renovation that would make another team's stadium worse. It would only impact your own team's stadium. The only way that would impact other teams is by having certain weathers be more common or less common. So for example, if your team has a lot of players which are not allergic to peanuts, you might want to have the weather that causes peanuts to run through the air to be more common at your stadium, and maybe other teams visiting would accidentally swallow a peanut and have an allergic reaction. That's not one of the most common ways to view your renovation strategy, but it was a strategy that was on the table. Wills, on the other hand, acted like blessings, but from a pool that only your team would be drawing from. You would usually get 2 wills for your team, though sometimes you would get more or less based on various decrees or other happenstances going on in the game. And these wills would usually provide your team with a benefit, but sometimes they would do things to other teams as well. For example, there could be a will that would allow you to exchange one of your players into a team from the opposite sub-league, essentially going from the American League to the National League if we're talking in MLB terms. And I personally think that if one team says, hey, we have a bad player and we're going to swap it to your team and take one of your good players, I have no problem with that. That is a team using the mechanics presented in the game to make a move to advantage their team. I think that it might be unkind, but it is fair. They are going to probably have the same thing happen to them again in the next section of wills, but they have their advantage for that season. Maybe they're trying to make a push. More power to you. I'm not happy about it, but I do think it's fair. But where we come into a problem with the wills is the same place we come into a problem with Kill Your Darling. There was nothing stopping a fan from another team setting up multiple alternate accounts to farm votes for a team that they did not particularly like, and to use those votes to vote for a will to send a good player away from the team they're voting with onto the team that they actually like in exchange for a bad player. That doesn't seem right, does it? You're taking another team's will and using it to harm them. How is that something that's good? Certainly, Blaseball isn't going to come out and say this is an intended part of the game, right? Oh, they did. They did come out and say that doing this is an intended part of the game. Maybe not the alternate accounts. That was left ambiguous for a very long time, despite people repeatedly asking about it. But they did say if you want to go ahead and move over to another team and spend a vote, that's totally fine. No problem. Fun. When a fan exploited a code mistake to allow themselves to farm an enormous amount of coins to push into the renovation system, Blaseball put a stop to that. They said these were not the renovations that you intended to pick, and so we are going to undo it and not give you these bad renovations that you didn't want, these 3 teams in particular. When that happened with wills, they made no such concession. They said this is intended to be working this way. When this happened to the stakes wills multiple times in multiple seasons, there was no statement made, no apology, no undoing of the thing we didn't want to have happen. It was wills working as intended. I guess I never expected an apology, but it would have been nice to get one. When they did eventually say, hey, you know what, these alternate accounts that someone has finally come out and admitted they're actively doing, we're going to say you're not allowed to do that anymore. We're not going to undo the thing that they did, but we are going to say from now on you're not allowed to do it anymore. Great. We've only been saying this for 2 months now. I will say that the teams that were hit by the renovation oopsie, one of them was the Baltimore Crabs, which is one of the most lively fan bases in Blaseball. I do wonder if that had something to do with it. All this to say that Blaseball is built on a bedrock of the devs playing favorites with the teams that either they like or that the fans have chosen they like, not wanting to offend them. And they have built in gameplay elements that give them an outsized advantage over the smaller teams. Honestly, if they want to do that, that is their prerogative. Who am I to say that they need to share what they're doing from season to season? What gives me the right to ask for August Mina to get the same benefits that Winnie Hess got? Maybe it was actually pure inspired genius when the Crabs came in the middle of season 12 and stole a blessing that the Stakes should have gotten because they were at the bottom of their league, but the Crabs were technically at the bottom because they didn't have any wins. Maybe that was actually the best thing ever, and I would understand that if I wasn't a silly little baby. Okay, you might be able to tell that last one I'm still bitter about, but the others, those are legitimate design decisions that they are fully allowed to make. But I want to ask you this. If you sit down at a TTRPG table and the GM is constantly screwing over your character and giving benefits to others, are you going to keep sitting at that table? Because I know my answer to that question.